The easiest way to mistake power is to assume the loudest person in the room owns it. The Royal Heritage Gala had transformed the historic Grand Windsor Ballroom into something that looked almost untouched by time. Crystal chandeliers hung from vaulted ceilings more than 40 feet above the marble floor. Gold-trimmed columns reflected warm light across polished surfaces. A string quartet played softly near the entrance while photographers gathered outside beneath a line of luxury vehicles stretching down the block. Every year, the gala attracted some of the most influential names in America and Europe. Business leaders, philanthropists, cultural ambassadors, political figures. Invitations were difficult to obtain and nearly impossible to purchase. Being seen inside the room meant something. Andrew Sinclair understood that better than most. At 47, he had spent years building a reputation that opened nearly every door he wanted to walk through. Tonight, he intended to enjoy every second of it. As flashes from cameras reflected across the red carpet, Andrew stepped from a black luxury sedan wearing a perfectly tailored tuxedo. Beside him emerged Brianna Hayes, a 29-year-old social media personality whose beauty and confidence naturally attracted attention. The photographers immediately responded. Camera shutters accelerated. Several reporters called out their names. Brianna smiled brightly and adjusted the elegant silver gown flowing around her. Andrew offered his arm and slowed his pace intentionally. Not enough to appear obvious, just enough to ensure people noticed them. "This is incredible," Brianna said as they approached the entrance. "Everyone is looking at us." Andrew smiled. "They usually do." The confidence in his voice sounded effortless. Practiced. The voice of a man accustomed to admiration. Together they entered the ballroom beneath the glow of chandeliers and the quiet attention of arriving guests. Conversations paused briefly as people recognized Andrew. Several executives crossed the room to shake his hand. A donor greeted him warmly. An investor offered congratulations on a recent acquisition. Everything unfolded exactly as Andrew expected. The room felt familiar, comfortable, like another stage designed for people like him. Brianna absorbed every detail. The gowns, the jewelry, the famous faces. The atmosphere seemed almost unreal. "This place feels like a palace," she whispered. Andrew laughed softly. "That is the point." A waiter passed carrying crystal glasses filled with sparkling water. Somewhere across the ballroom, a group of musicians began performing a classical arrangement. The evening carried the polished elegance of old money and established influence. Brianna glanced around again. "Do you know everyone here?" "Not everyone," Andrew replied. "But enough." His answer carried a trace of pride. As they moved deeper into the crowd, several guests greeted him by name. Brianna enjoyed every moment. The attention, the admiration, the sense that they belonged among the most important people in the room. Andrew appeared completely relaxed. Yet if anyone had watched closely, they might have noticed something else. He never once looked uncertain, never questioned whether he belonged. He carried himself like a man who believed he understood exactly how the room worked. Near the center of the ballroom, they paused beside a large display showcasing the evening's sponsors and cultural partners. Brianna admired the elaborate decorations while Andrew accepted another handshake from a business associate. The night seemed perfect, prestigious, predictable, entirely under control. Neither of them noticed the brief glance exchanged between two event coordinators nearby. Neither heard one staff member quietly ask another whether preparations for a special arrival had been completed. And neither had the slightest idea that the most important person connected to the gala had not yet entered the room. Andrew and Brianna moved deeper into the ballroom as the evening settled into a comfortable rhythm of conversation, music, and quiet displays of influence. Crystal glasses reflected the warm chandelier light, while servers moved gracefully between tables carrying trays of appetizers and sparkling water. Everywhere Brianna looked, she saw faces she recognized from magazines, television interviews, and social media. The experience felt surreal. "I still cannot believe I am here," she admitted as they paused beside a display of historical artifacts being auctioned for charity. Andrew smiled. "You belong here now." Brianna seemed pleased by the answer. She adjusted a bracelet on her wrist and glanced around the room again. "Did you come to these events with your ex-wife?" The question arrived casually, but Andrew immediately knew who she meant. He picked up a glass from a nearby tray before answering. "A long time ago." "What was she like?" Brianna asked. Andrew gave a short laugh. Not cruel, not angry, just dismissive. Victoria always treated everything like work. Brianna tilted her head. What does that mean? It means she never understood how to enjoy herself. He took a sip of water. Every conversation became a project. Every event became a responsibility. Every opportunity became another obligation. Brianna listened carefully. She had heard pieces of the story before, but never directly from him. You make her sound serious. She was serious. Andrew looked across the ballroom toward a group of donors speaking near the stage. Very serious. Brianna smiled lightly. Maybe that is not such a bad thing. In moderation, no. Andrew shrugged. But eventually it becomes exhausting. The conversation drifted away as another guest approached to greet him. Yet something about the exchange lingered. Andrew spoke about Victoria as though she belonged to a chapter of his life that had long since ended. A person whose importance had faded with time. A memory. Nothing more. Several feet away, two event coordinators were reviewing schedules on a tablet. One of them suddenly looked toward the entrance. Any update? She asked quietly. Her colleague nodded. Not yet. Has Ms. Sinclair confirmed? We are still waiting. The first coordinator exhaled slowly. The board members are asking. Neither Andrew nor Brianna heard the exchange. A few minutes later, they arrived near one of the ballroom's largest tables where donors and cultural advisors were gathered. Introductions followed. Names were exchanged. Compliments were offered. Then a distinguished older gentleman turned toward one of the event staff. Has Ms. Sinclair arrived yet? The staff member shook her head politely. Not yet, sir. The gentleman looked disappointed. Please let me know when she does. Brianna noticed the interaction immediately. Who is Ms. Sinclair? She asked after the man walked away. Andrew glanced up briefly. No idea. The answer seemed genuine. He returned to the conversation without another thought. Yet over the next 30 minutes, the same name surfaced again. A foundation director asked about Miss Sinclair. A museum trustee asked whether she was attending. A donor from London mentioned hoping to see her before the evening ended. Each mention was brief, casual, easy to overlook. But Brianna noticed. That is the third time I have heard that name, she said. Andrew laughed softly. Then she must be important to someone. Brianna expected him to be curious. Instead, he seemed completely uninterested. Around them, the gala continued unfolding with polished elegance. The orchestra played another arrangement. Guests circulated between tables. Conversations blended into a sophisticated hum beneath the chandeliers. Yet somewhere behind the scenes, preparations continued quietly. Schedules were checked again. Messages were exchanged. Staff members glanced toward the entrance more often than before. And while Andrew remained convinced he understood exactly who mattered inside the ballroom, the room itself seemed to be waiting for someone else. As the evening progressed, the Royal Heritage Gala seemed to grow more elegant with every passing minute. Candlelight flickered across polished tables. Soft classical music drifted beneath the chandeliers. Conversations flowed between diplomats, museum directors, foundation leaders, and some of the most influential donors in the country. To most guests, the event appeared flawless. Yet beneath the polished surface, a strange pattern was becoming impossible to ignore. The same name continued appearing in conversation after conversation. Victoria Sinclair. Andrew first noticed it near one of the fundraising exhibits positioned along the ballroom's eastern wall. A distinguished woman wearing a sapphire evening gown approached a member of the organizing committee and asked politely, Has Victoria arrived? The staff member offered an apologetic smile. Not yet. The woman seemed genuinely disappointed before moving on. Andrew barely paid attention. Moments later, another conversation produced the same question. Then another. By the fourth time, even Brianna could not ignore it. There is that name again, she said. Andrew looked up from a discussion about international investments. What name? Victoria Sinclair. Andrew froze for the smallest fraction of a second. The reaction was so brief that Brianna almost missed it. Then he smiled. There are a lot of people named Victoria. You think it is someone else? Brianna asked. Andrew shrugged. Probably. Yet his confidence sounded slightly less natural than before. They continued walking through the ballroom. Everywhere they turned, subtle signs of anticipation seemed to be building. Several members of the event staff checked their phones repeatedly. A group of trustees near the stage appeared to be waiting for news. Even some of the guests seemed distracted, occasionally glancing toward the entrance. Brianna noticed everything. Andrew pretended not to. Eventually, they stopped beside a large display honoring major contributors to cultural preservation projects. Gold lettering covered a series of polished black panels. Names of donors, patrons, and partner organizations stretched across the display beneath soft lighting. Brianna studied the list while Andrew exchanged greetings with a retired ambassador. Then her eyes stopped on a familiar surname. Andrew. He turned. What? She pointed toward one of the panels. Look. Andrew followed her finger. There, engraved among several prominent names, appeared a title. Victoria Sinclair, founding patron, Royal Heritage Foundation. For a moment, he simply stared. Then he laughed softly. Interesting. Brianna looked at him. That is your ex-wife. Yes. What does founding patron mean? Andrew slipped his hands into his pockets. Probably donated money years ago. His answer arrived too quickly, as if he wanted the subject closed. Brianna accepted the explanation, but something about it felt incomplete. Nearby, two museum directors were discussing upcoming projects. One of them noticed the display and smiled. Victoria changed everything for this foundation. The other nodded immediately. Without her, none of this would exist. Andrew heard the exchange. So did Brianna. Neither speaker realized they were standing only a few feet away. The words lingered in the air long after the conversation ended. Andrew turned away first. People exaggerate. Brianna remained quiet. She was beginning to sense a version of Victoria she had never heard before. Not the serious woman Andrew occasionally described. Not the forgotten ex-wife left behind in an old chapter of his life. Something else. Something larger. Across the ballroom, another coordinator hurried toward the stage carrying a clipboard. A trustee immediately approached her. Any word? The coordinator nodded. She is expected soon. Relief spread across the trustee's face. Around them, preparations subtly accelerated. Staff members adjusted schedules. Security personnel received updates. Organizers exchanged brief smiles. Whatever was coming, important people seemed eager for it to happen. Andrew watched the movement from across the room. For the first time all evening, uncertainty began replacing certainty. Not because he knew what was happening, but because he was starting to realize everyone else might know something he did not. 5 years earlier, when the divorce papers were finally signed, most people believed they already knew how the story would end. Andrew Sinclair was expanding his business empire, appearing in magazines, speaking at conferences, and building relationships with influential investors. Victoria Sinclair, meanwhile, seemed to vanish from public view almost overnight. Friends stopped mentioning her name. Reporters lost interest. Invitations gradually disappeared. To outside observers, the future appeared obvious. One life was moving forward. The other had quietly faded into the background. The reality could not have been more different. During the first year after the divorce, Victoria accepted almost every invitation Andrew would have immediately declined. Not glamorous events. Not media appearances. Working meetings. Foundation boards. Historical preservation committees. Educational initiatives. Cultural development programs. Rooms filled with people interested in solving problems rather than attracting attention. At first, few people noticed her. She seemed content remaining in the background. She listened carefully, asked thoughtful questions, followed through on commitments. While others competed for visibility, Victoria focused on building trust. One project led to another. A fundraising campaign saved a historic theater from closure. A partnership restored several cultural landmarks. A scholarship initiative expanded access to arts education for students who otherwise could not afford it. The work was rarely exciting from the outside. There were no headlines, no dramatic announcements. Yet year after year, the results accumulated. People began remembering her name, not because she demanded recognition, because she consistently delivered results. In Boston, museum directors respected her judgment. In Washington, nonprofit leaders sought her advice. In London, charitable organizations invited her to collaborate on international programs. The network grew slowly, almost invisibly. One relationship at a time. One project at a time. One promise kept after another. Eventually, she helped create something larger than any individual initiative. A foundation dedicated to preserving cultural heritage while supporting educational opportunities and public access to the arts. The organization expanded faster than anyone expected. Donors trusted it. Institutions partnered with it. Communities benefited from it. Victoria never placed herself at the center. She preferred focusing attention on the mission itself. Yet everyone involved understood who had built the foundation's structure and reputation. Back in the present, the gala continued around Andrew and Brianna while those years remained completely invisible to them. A speech concluded near the main stage. Applause echoed through the ballroom. Guests returned to their conversations. Servers refreshed tables with quiet efficiency. Everything appeared elegant and controlled. Yet behind the scenes, anticipation was becoming increasingly difficult to hide. A senior board member checked his watch for what seemed like the 10th time. Two foundation trustees stood near the entrance speaking in low voices. Several donors who had flown in from Europe appeared more interested in the arrival schedule than the evening's program. Brianna noticed the pattern immediately. "I have never seen people this focused on one person before," she admitted. Andrew forced a relaxed smile. "People like important names. This feels different." He did not answer. Across the room, a distinguished philanthropist greeted several guests before stopping beside a trustee. "Any update?" he asked. The trustee nodded. "We are expecting her soon." Relief appeared on the man's face. Genuine relief. As though the success of the evening depended on a single arrival. Andrew watched the exchange from a distance. Something about it unsettled him more than he wanted to admit. Not because he understood what was happening, because he did not. For years he had believed Victoria stepped away from influence when she stepped away from him. Yet every conversation he overheard suggested the opposite. Somewhere between the life he remembered and the woman everyone seemed to be waiting for, an entire story existed that he had never bothered to learn. The evening had reached that point where anticipation became almost visible. Guests continued smiling, networking, and enjoying the carefully orchestrated elegance of the gala, but beneath the surface another current was moving through the room. It revealed itself in small moments. A trustee checking his phone every few minutes. A donor interrupting a conversation to ask whether there had been any updates. A museum director scanning the entrance whenever the ballroom doors opened. Brianna noticed it everywhere. The closer she paid attention, the more obvious it became. "I feel like everyone is waiting for someone," she said quietly as she and Andrew moved toward a table displaying plans for upcoming cultural preservation projects. Andrew forced a casual smile. Important people attract attention. This feels different than attention. He did not respond immediately. Across the ballroom, a distinguished gentleman from London had just arrived. Within moments, several organizers greeted him personally. After exchanging pleasantries, his first question was not about the event, the auction, or the foundation's financial goals. It was much simpler. "Has Victoria arrived?" The answer disappointed him. Brianna heard it from 20 feet away. So did Andrew. The name seemed impossible to escape now. A few minutes later, they found themselves standing near a group of university presidents discussing educational grants and historical restoration programs. Brianna listened politely while Andrew spoke with a donor from Chicago. Then one of the university leaders smiled and said something that immediately captured her attention. "Victoria has a remarkable ability to bring people together." Another nodded. "The foundation would never have reached this level without her." A third added, "I still remember when she convinced 3 competing organizations to collaborate on the same initiative. Nobody thought it could be done." They laughed warmly. Not the laughter people use when discussing a powerful celebrity. The laughter of genuine respect. Brianna glanced toward Andrew. He appeared focused on his conversation, but she noticed a slight tension in his jaw. For the first time all evening, he seemed less comfortable than before. The stories continued. Everywhere they walked, fragments of Victoria's reputation followed them. Someone mentioned her role in restoring a historic theater. Another praised her commitment to educational access. A donor described her as one of the most trusted figures in the cultural sector. None of these conversations sounded rehearsed. They came from different people, different industries, different backgrounds. Yet all of them carried the same theme. Respect. Real respect. Not admiration for wealth. Not fascination with status. Respect earned over years of consistent action. Brianna finally spoke the thought forming in her mind. "You never told me any of this." Andrew looked at her. "Any of what?" "That your ex-wife was involved in all of this." He glanced around the ballroom. "I did not know she was." The answer surprised even him. Back near the stage, event organizers suddenly became more active. Staff members adjusted seating arrangements. Security personnel exchanged brief updates through earpieces. A foundation trustee walked directly to the podium before speaking quietly with the master of ceremonies. Whatever was happening, it mattered. Guests began noticing the shift. Conversations slowed. People checked the entrance more frequently. Several board members actually moved closer to the front of the ballroom. Then a senior organizer approached one of the trustees. "Everything is ready," she said. The trustee smiled with visible relief. "Good. We have been waiting all evening." Those words seemed to echo through the room. Waiting all evening. Andrew watched the exchange from across the ballroom. For years he had believed influence looked like recognition, headlines, and public success. Yet tonight he was witnessing another form of influence entirely. One powerful enough to command the attention of people who rarely waited for anyone. Around him, the gala continued shining beneath crystal chandeliers and golden light. Yet the room no longer felt centered around the guests already inside. It felt centered around an arrival that had not happened yet. And for reasons he could not fully explain, Andrew was beginning to feel as though the evening belonged to someone else. By 9 o'clock, the atmosphere inside the ballroom had become impossible to mistake. Something significant was approaching. Even guests who knew nothing about the foundation's internal structure could feel it. Conversations drifted toward the same subject. Staff members moved with greater urgency. Board members gathered near the front of the room. The evening's carefully controlled rhythm had begun changing in subtle but unmistakable ways. Andrew stood beside Brianna near one of the grand marble columns overlooking the main floor. From there, he could see almost the entire ballroom. Hundreds of guests filled the space beneath the glow of crystal chandeliers. Yet his attention kept returning to the entrance. He found the habit irritating. He did not understand why he cared. "You are doing it too," Brianna said. Andrew glanced at her. "Doing what?" "Looking at the doors." He laughed softly. "I suppose everyone else is. I think you want to know who she became." The comment landed more accurately than either of them expected. Andrew turned away without answering. Across the room, a foundation trustee stepped onto the stage and spoke briefly with the master of ceremonies. Several event coordinators immediately began making final adjustments. A row of reserved seats near the front was checked one last time. Floral arrangements were repositioned. Even the musicians received new instructions. Guests noticed. Conversations began slowing naturally. Curiosity spread from table to table. Then something unusual happened. One of the senior organizers emerged from a side corridor and walked directly toward the chairman of the foundation. The man listened carefully before a broad smile appeared on his face. He nodded once. Relief seemed to pass through him instantly. The organizer then moved to several other board members. Each received the same message. Each reacted the same way. Smiles. Nods. Visible satisfaction. Whatever news had arrived, it mattered enormously. Brianna watched the reactions unfold. "She is coming." Andrew looked toward the group. "Apparently. You still do not seem surprised." "I am not." But the statement was no longer entirely true. Because surprise was slowly being replaced by something else. Curiosity. During the years following their divorce, Andrew had rarely thought about Victoria beyond occasional memories and scattered updates. He assumed he understood her path. He assumed he knew the limits of her world. Tonight, every assumption seemed increasingly uncertain. Nearby, a respected museum director joined a conversation with several donors. "I have not seen Victoria since London," he said. "That was nearly a year ago." Another donor smiled. "She never stops working. That is because she believes these programs matter." "They do matter." The group nodded in agreement. No one spoke about her wealth. No one mentioned status. They spoke about trust, impact, leadership, respect. The qualities people discuss when admiration runs deeper than influence alone. Andrew listened without meaning to. Each conversation revealed another piece of a picture he had never seen. A woman who advised international organizations. A woman whose opinion shaped major cultural initiatives. A woman powerful enough to bring rivals into the same room and convince them to cooperate. None of it sounded familiar. Yet every story described the same person. Suddenly, the lights near the ballroom entrance softened slightly. Not dramatically, just enough to draw attention toward the far end of the room. Several guests noticed immediately. A few stood from their chairs. Board members exchanged glances. The chairman straightened his jacket. Around the ballroom, Conversations faded one by one until only the orchestra remained audible. The musicians shifted into a new arrangement. Elegant, anticipatory. The great room seemed to inhale collectively. Andrew followed everyone's gaze toward the entrance. Brianna did the same. Hundreds of eyes now focused on a single set of doors. And for the first time that evening, nobody appeared interested in who was already inside the ballroom. Every person was waiting for the one who had not yet arrived. The enormous ballroom had grown so quiet that even the soft notes of the orchestra seemed unusually clear. Hundreds of guests stood suspended between curiosity and expectation, their attention fixed on the grand entrance at the far end of the room. The chandeliers above cast warm light across polished marble floors, while servers paused discreetly along the walls. Nobody had been instructed to stop talking. The conversations simply faded on their own. Anticipation had become stronger than etiquette. Andrew stood beside Brianna, watching the entrance with the same focus as everyone else. Somewhere deep inside, he still expected a simple explanation. A respected donor, an influential board member, a philanthropist with a large checkbook. Nothing more. Then the doors opened. For a brief moment, nobody moved. A woman stepped through the entrance with the quiet confidence of someone who did not need to announce herself. Victoria Sinclair wore an elegant midnight blue gown that reflected the golden light with understated sophistication. A strand of pearls rested against her neckline. Her posture was calm. Her expression was composed. There was no attempt to command attention. Yet attention found her instantly. Andrew felt the air leave his lungs. 5 years had passed since he had last seen her in person. Time had changed many things. But what struck him most was not her appearance. It was the certainty she carried. The certainty of someone entirely comfortable in her own place in the world. Beside him, Brianna stared openly. "That is Victoria?" she whispered. Andrew could only nod. Across the ballroom, a distinguished museum chairman was the first to move. He stood from his seat. Moments later, a university president rose as well. Then a foundation trustee. Then a renowned philanthropist. One by one, guests throughout the ballroom began standing. Not because anyone asked them to. Not because a protocol required it. They stood because respect compelled them to. The movement spread through the room like a wave. Entire tables rose. Conversations stopped completely. Even some of the international dignitaries who rarely acknowledged anyone publicly stepped forward. Victoria paused briefly near the entrance and greeted several guests with warm familiarity. She knew their names, their families, their projects. The interactions felt genuine. Years of trust compressed into a few simple exchanges. Andrew watched in stunned silence. This was not celebrity. It was something deeper. These people were not impressed by her. They valued her. The distinction suddenly felt enormous. Brianna looked around the ballroom. Everyone knows her. Andrew did not answer, because the truth was becoming impossible to ignore. They did more than know her. They respected her, admired her, trusted her. Across the room, board members who had spent the evening appearing tense now seemed visibly relieved. Several approached Victoria immediately. Others simply smiled from a distance. The chairman of the foundation himself crossed nearly half the ballroom to greet her. Guests stepped aside naturally, creating space without being asked. Victoria accepted every greeting with the same quiet grace. No grand gestures, no dramatic speeches, no visible effort to enjoy the moment. She behaved as though this level of admiration was neither surprising nor unusual. Andrew felt something unfamiliar settle over him. For years he had measured influence by visibility, media coverage, public recognition, financial success. Yet none of those things could explain what he was witnessing. No one was applauding because Victoria was wealthy. No one was standing because she was famous. They were standing because of who she had become when nobody was watching. Near the stage, the master of ceremonies exchanged a glance with the foundation chairman and received a subtle nod. The evening's most important moment was approaching. Around the ballroom, guests gradually returned to their seats, though many continued watching Victoria as she moved through the room. Andrew followed her with his eyes, struggling to reconcile the woman he remembered with the woman standing before him. And for the first time all evening, he realized a truth he had never considered. He had not walked into Victoria's world by accident. He had spent the entire night inside it without even knowing. As Victoria moved through the ballroom, the atmosphere remained transformed by her presence. Guests who only moments earlier had been focused on networking and formalities now seemed united by a shared sense of admiration. Conversations followed her naturally. Foundation leaders greeted her. Museum directors thanked her. Educators and philanthropists approached with genuine warmth. Yet, through it all, Victoria remained exactly the same. Calm, gracious, unhurried. She neither demanded attention nor appeared surprised by it. Andrew watched from across the room, unable to look away. Every interaction challenged the assumptions he had carried for years. The woman standing beneath the chandeliers seemed completely different from the image he had preserved in his memory. Or perhaps she had always been this person, and he had simply failed to notice. Near the stage, the master of ceremonies stepped forward and adjusted the microphone. The room gradually settled into silence once more. Guests returned to their seats. The orchestra lowered its volume. Even the staff paused as the evening approached its most anticipated moment. The chairman of the Royal Heritage Foundation took his place beside the podium. His expression carried unmistakable pride. "Ladies and gentlemen," the master of ceremonies began. "Before we continue with tonight's program, there is someone we would like to recognize." The ballroom grew still. Andrew felt Brianna straighten beside him. The giant screen behind the stage illuminated, displaying images from cultural projects, restored landmarks, educational programs, and community initiatives spanning more than a decade. Photographs appeared one after another. Historic theaters reopened. Museums expanded. Scholarship recipients celebrated academic achievements. Communities gathered at cultural events funded through foundation grants. The images told a story larger than any single project. A story of sustained impact. Many people know the Royal Heritage Foundation for its work. The Master of Ceremonies continued. What fewer people understand is how it began. Another image appeared. A much younger Victoria standing beside volunteers during a restoration project. Then another. Victoria speaking with educators. Victoria meeting community leaders. Victoria visiting preservation sites. None of the photographs looked staged. They captured years of effort rather than moments of publicity. The chairman stepped forward. 15 years ago, one woman believed cultural heritage should remain accessible to everyone, regardless of background or income. She invested not only resources, but time, leadership, and trust. Murmurs moved through the audience. Though many already knew the story, hearing it publicly carried a different weight. She built partnerships where others saw obstacles. She united organizations that had spent years competing. She created opportunities for future generations while refusing personal recognition. Andrew felt his chest tighten. Around him, guests nodded in agreement. Some smiled knowingly. Others looked toward Victoria with obvious affection. Then the chairman spoke the words that removed any remaining doubt. "Please join me in recognizing the founder of the Royal Heritage Foundation, the creator and host of this gala, Victoria Sinclair." Applause erupted instantly. Not polite applause. Not ceremonial applause. Genuine appreciation. Hundreds of guests rose to their feet. The standing ovation spread across the ballroom in seconds. Brianna stared at the stage, speechless. Andrew remained motionless. Host, founder, creator. The realization settled over him with overwhelming clarity. He had spent the entire evening believing he was attending someone else's event. In reality, every detail surrounding him existed because of Victoria's vision. The foundation, the partnerships, the board members, the cultural leaders. The very room itself had gathered around something she built. Victoria rose gracefully from her seat and walked toward the stage. The applause intensified, yet her expression remained humble, almost embarrassed by the attention. As she stepped into the spotlight, Andrew finally understood why the room had been waiting all night. Not because Victoria possessed the most wealth, not because she held the highest title, but because she had become the person whose presence mattered most. The applause continued long after Victoria reached the stage. It rolled through the ballroom in waves, echoing beneath crystal chandeliers and vaulted ceilings, carried by the admiration of people who understood exactly what she had built. Yet when the applause finally softened and the room settled into silence, Victoria stood before the microphone with the same quiet composure she had displayed all evening. She looked across the audience, not as a woman claiming victory, but as someone grateful for the people surrounding her. "Thank you," she said gently. The room listened. This foundation was never created by one person. Every teacher, volunteer, donor, mentor, student, and community leader represented here tonight helped shape what it became. Her words were simple, honest, unpolished by performance. The greatest privilege in life is creating opportunities that continue helping people long after you are gone. Several guests nodded. Others smiled. Victoria glanced briefly toward the audience. Preserving culture is important. Supporting education is important. But believing in people before the rest of the world notices them may be the most important thing of all. The room responded with warm applause once again. Then she stepped away from the microphone. No dramatic speech. No celebration of herself. Just gratitude. The very quality that had earned the respect surrounding her. As the evening continued, guests approached Victoria from every corner of the ballroom. Foundation partners shared updates on ongoing projects. University leaders invited her to future initiatives. Young scholarship recipients thanked her personally. The atmosphere felt less like a gala and more like a reunion of people connected by a common purpose. Andrew watched everything from a distance. For the first time in years, he found himself remembering details he had long forgotten. Late nights, when Victoria stayed awake planning charitable projects while he focused on business growth. Conversations she once tried to have about community programs and cultural preservation. Causes he dismissed as distractions. Back then he believed success meant visibility, recognition, expansion, profit. Tonight he was seeing another form of success entirely. One built quietly over years. One measured by trust rather than attention. Brianna remained unusually silent. Eventually she looked toward him. I understand now. Andrew glanced at her. Understand what? She looked across the ballroom toward Victoria. Why everyone was waiting. Andrew followed her gaze. He did not answer, because there was nothing left to explain. Near midnight, the gala began winding down. Guests slowly departed. Conversations turned into farewells. The orchestra played its final arrangement. Staff members started clearing tables while organizers discussed the evening's success. Victoria spent another hour greeting attendees before finally making her way toward the exit. Several board members thanked her. The chairman embraced her warmly. Donors wished her safe travels. She accepted every goodbye with the same grace she had shown throughout the evening. As she approached the grand entrance, Andrew found himself stepping forward. For a brief moment, they stood facing one another. 5 years of distance separated them, yet neither appeared uncomfortable. Congratulations, Andrew said quietly. Victoria smiled. Thank you. The silence that followed felt surprisingly peaceful. Andrew searched for something meaningful to say. An explanation. An apology. A question. None seemed sufficient. Victoria saved him from trying. I am glad the evening was enjoyable, she said kindly. The words were polite. Professional. The kind words a host offers a guest at the conclusion of a successful event. Nothing more. Andrew understood immediately. This was not a reunion. This was closure. Victoria had not returned to reclaim the past. She had moved beyond it. A black car arrived outside beneath the glow of the city lights. Victoria exchanged a few final farewells before stepping toward the vehicle. She paused briefly and offered Andrew one last smile. Then she entered the car. Moments later it disappeared into the Manhattan night. Andrew remained standing beneath the entrance lights as the gala slowly faded behind him. For years he believed he had been the success story. Tonight he finally understood something different. Victoria never needed the room to notice her. She built a life so meaningful that eventually the entire room stood up on its own. And in the end, she did not win him back. She won herself.